Manzikert 1071. The battle that changed Anatolia. The first crack in our line did not sound like a shout. It sounded like a few horse hooves fading away into the dust. Then I saw men turning their heads, looking behind them as if the earth itself had changed its mind. I still remember the heat on that plain near Manzikert. It was late August, and the air over eastern Anatolia shimmered as if the land itself were burning. We had marched for weeks to reach this place, leaving behind the long roads of the empire and the broken edges of our frontier. We came east to recover what had been lost, to remind the world that the Emperor of the Romans still ruled in Asia. That was what we told ourselves. That was what the banners meant when they lifted in the morning wind. I was not among the great men of the army. I was a soldier in the Emperor's host, one face among thousands, a mailed man with a shield on my arm and dust already in my beard by the time we reached the plain. But I saw enough to understand that this was no small raid, no border skirmish. Romanos IV had brought a great campaign into Anatolia, and we all knew why. For years, our lands in the east had been gnawed away by Turkish raids, one village after another, one fortress after another, until the frontier felt less like a line and more like a wound that never healed. There were still men in Constantinople who spoke as if the empire were whole. Out here, in the provinces, we knew better. We knew about abandoned farms, frightened towns, and roads where traders now traveled in armor. We knew about the taxes that weighed on the people, and the bitter rivalries among our own commanders, men who should have stood together but watched one another as if each carried a knife under his cloak. The empire had strength, yes, but it was a strength strained by suspicion. Everyone knew the army was not just fighting the Turks. It was also carrying the weight of politics, pride, and old grudges. Romanos wanted to change that. He had risen as emperor with the confidence of a soldier, not a courtier. He looked like a man made for hard ground and hard decisions. He had come east to restore imperial authority in Anatolia, to push the Seljuks back, to show the Armenians and the frontier garrisons that Byzantium had not abandoned them. We believed he might do it. We had heavy cavalry, armored horsemen, infantry, archers, and contingents from many corners of the empire. Some of the men rode under imperial banners. Others were mercenaries, foreigners in our service, drawn by pay or plunder or necessity. The army was large, though no one could agree how large. Men whispered numbers that sounded like the census of a kingdom. In truth, no one in the ranks knew the full count. We only knew there were enough of us to make the plain seem crowded when we moved in order. We marched east under a sun that seemed to press down on our helmets. The roads were bad. The supply wagons moved slowly. Horses tired quickly in that country. Water mattered more than glory. Every stop became a small battle against thirst, against fatigue, against the endless problem of feeding so many mouths far from the empire's rich heartlands. Yet the emperor pressed on, and for a while that gave us confidence. If Romanos was willing to go this far, then surely he knew what awaited us. We heard that Alp Arslan, the Seljuk Sultan, was elsewhere at first, moving in Syria. That news spread through the camp like a warm breeze. Some said he would never dare face us openly. Others said he would run at the first sight of our banners. The Turks had frightened many towns in the past, striking fast, vanishing faster, riding around heavier armies and cutting them down from a distance. But men who have never stood on a battlefield always imagine the enemy in simple terms. We thought in terms of armor and numbers. We thought in terms of a decisive fight. We wanted a battle we could point to later and say, "There, that was the day the frontier was restored." Then the world narrowed. Alp Arslan turned north with remarkable speed when he learned we were advancing. Word came that he had made a forced march back toward us. Some said he even came with great haste, leaving behind much of his baggage and coming dressed for war in white. Whether every detail was true, I cannot say. But I know the sense of danger changed the camp at once. A few days earlier, the men had joked about the Turks and spoke of home. After that, voices dropped. Men checked their straps twice. The horses were kept closer. Scouts rode out and returned with dust on their faces and fear in their eyes. Manzikert itself was only one place among many in that rough country, but it became the name we would remember. We approached the area near Lake Van, where the land opens and closes in uneven folds, with low hills and stretches of plain that can hide movement until the last moment. It was a country made for uncertainty. You could see far, and yet not far enough. The dry ground carried sound strangely. A horn on one ridge could seem closer than it was. A column of dust could mean a flock of animals, or a troop of horsemen, or death riding toward you in silence. Romanos divided his forces as we neared the fortress town. He sent men to hold one place, others to search for the enemy, others to keep watch on the roads. That division seemed sensible at the time. We needed to secure the area, to force the Turks into a fight, to prevent them from slipping away as they so often did. But every split in an army is a danger, and in our camp there were men who trusted one another less than they feared the Turks. Some of the commanders had their own ambitions. Some loved the emperor poorly. Some perhaps loved him not at all. I remember the morning before the battle most clearly because it felt almost ordinary. The sun rose hard and pale. Men ate in silence. Harnesses creaked. Shields tapped against saddles. There was a strange stillness in the ranks, the kind that comes before a storm when every bird has gone quiet. A priest moved among us with prayers. The emperor was seen riding along the line, speaking to men, steadying them with his presence. I saw his armor glint, and for a moment I believed we stood on the edge of a great victory. We had come too far for anything else. The Seljuks appeared as movement more than a solid shape. First dust, then riders, then more riders than I had expected, flowing across the land with a kind of loose order that made them seem everywhere at once. Their horses were smaller than ours, but they moved like they belonged to the earth. They did not present themselves like our heavy cavalry. No fixed block of iron advancing on a single command. They circled, probed, and watched. Arrows began to fall. At first they seemed almost incidental, like angry insects. Then one man beside me folded over his saddle with a shaft in his throat, and another began screaming with an arrow through the eye. After that, every sound of air made me flinch. We advanced in good order at first. Our line stretched across the plain, and there was pride in that sight. The shields were bright, the lances lowered. The emperor's banners stood above us, but the Turks refused the kind of battle we wanted. They moved back, lured us forward, then turned and struck from the side, always just out of reach. Their horses swerved and regrouped. Their archers loosed again and again. The arrows came in clouds, not enough at first to break us, but enough to wear on the nerves. The men in the front ranks had to hold position while those behind them saw little and feared much. Every few moments a rider would cry out that the enemy was fleeing. Then another would shout that the enemy was circling behind us. That was when I first felt the army's confidence begin to thin. It was not a single moment, not a trumpet blast, or a heroic charge. It was a slow, ugly realization that our order was being pulled apart by a rhythm we did not understand. We were built for a clear line, for a hard strike, for a fight where armor and discipline could decide the day. The Turks were making the day itself uncertain. They kept distance, then closed it, then disappeared again. They made our strength hard to use. Still, I believed we would hold. We had done worse marches than this. We had stood under arrows before. The emperor was there. The center held. Yet, as the afternoon wore on, I noticed men on the wings becoming restless. Some units moved forward too eagerly. Others hesitated. A cry went up that the enemy was retreating. Another said they were drawing us in. I could no longer tell which was true. The dust swallowed the far edge of the battlefield. The sun moved lower. Shadows lengthened. And in that light, every rider looked like another. Then came the order to advance further. I did not hear it clearly at first. Commands were being passed down the line, but the field was full of noise now. Horses screaming, men shouting, metal striking metal, arrows thudding into shields and leather and flesh. We pushed forward, and that was when the line stretched too far. The center and the wings no longer seemed to move as one body. Somewhere to one side, part of our force began to withdraw. Whether they mistook the order, lost nerve, or pulled back deliberately, I cannot say. Even now men argue over that. At the time, all I knew was that space opened where there should have been men. And the enemy saw it immediately. A terrible unease spread through us. I looked left and saw riders where I expected infantry. I looked right and saw a gap filled only by dust and horses turning in circles. Men started calling for signals that did not come. The cry of rally rose and fell and was lost. A few of our own troops were suddenly moving backward, not in retreat as a unit, but in confusion, bumping into one another, trying to understand what the rest of the army was doing. The Seljuks pressed closer, their arrows coming in sharper now, as if they had sensed the weakness in us the way wolves sense blood on the wind. I remember the exact feeling of that moment. Not yet defeat, but the first cold knowledge that the battle was slipping beyond anyone's hand. Then, the line broke. It did not break like a wall, collapsing all at once. It broke like a rope snapping strand by strand until the tension became too much. One group turned. Another hesitated. A cavalry wing surged ahead and then found itself isolated. Dust swallowed the men at the edges, and in that dust the Turks struck with alarming speed. Their horse archers came in close enough to provoke us, then wheeled away just as our riders lunged. I saw armored men trying to reform while arrows hammered into their horses. I saw a standard go down and men scrambling for it before vanishing under the press. And then the Emperor's own position became hard to find amid the confusion. Someone shouted that the right wing had gone. Someone else shouted that the center was surrounded. The words hit us like blows because we could feel their truth before we understood them. The army was no longer a single force. It was fragments, each one fighting its own panic. I remember turning in the saddle and seeing more Seljuk riders than seemed possible, as if they had multiplied in the dust. Their movement was so quick, so fluid, that it felt less like a battle than a net closing. A charge went out from our side, a final attempt to force the enemy back. I rode with men who still believed a hard uda, a brutal forward push, could restore the field. For a heartbeat it seemed possible. The horses gathered, the lances dipped, and our line lunged. But the Turks gave ground just enough, then struck the flanks again. Their arrows and maneuvers punished us for every step forward. The moment our formation lost its shape, they were inside it. Men shouted prayers, curses, names of wives and sons, anything that could make the fear smaller. I saw one of our commanders fall, not because of a glorious duel, but because his horse went down under him, shot and stumbling, and he was crushed in the chaos. When the Emperor's guard tried to pull him back, the field had already become a world of retreat and pursuit. The sun was dropping. The dust was so thick it turned the light a dull red. I could barely see 10 paces. In that haze, every rider looked like an enemy. Friends struck friends by mistake. Men threw down their shields to run faster. Others tried to fight on foot and were cut down where they stood. The sound that stays with me most is not the clash of weapons. It is the sound of men realizing, at once, that no help was coming. I do not know exactly when Romanos IV was separated from the rest of us, No one near me saw the whole end clearly. Some said he fought bravely until the last. Some said he was abandoned by men who should have stood by him. Some whispered that rival commanders had withheld support. On the field, I only saw the Imperial standard vanish into the confusion and did not see it return. By nightfall, the battle was lost. I escaped because my horse carried me through a gap no one else had noticed or cared to defend. I was lucky. That is the only honest word for it. Luck and terror. I rode until my lungs burned and my eyes stung from dust. Around me were men scattered in every direction, some fleeing in groups, some alone, some wounded and trying to keep pace on foot. The plain behind us was dotted with wrecked bodies, abandoned shields, broken spears, and the dead horses of men who had thought armor made them safe. The next day, the truth came in pieces. Romanos the Fourth had been captured by Alp Arslan. I heard that first as a rumor, then as a certainty. The Emperor of the Romans, the man who had marched east to restore imperial power, was now in the hands of the Sultan. I heard different stories about the terms that followed. Some said Alp Arslan treated him with surprising dignity. Some said the settlement was harsh, but practical. The exact words passed between them I cannot claim to know. What mattered was the result. Romanos was later released, but by then his power was already slipping away in Byzantium. Men in Constantinople did not forgive defeat easily, and the empire's great men moved quickly when weakness appeared. For us in the shattered army, the field itself felt haunted. Survivors gathered in small knots, counting names, searching for relatives, for comrades, for officers who had not returned. We had marched east as if we were the hand of empire. Now we were just scattered men in damaged armor, staring at the place where that confidence had died. The defeat did not end Byzantine rule in Anatolia overnight. That is important, because later people speak of Manzikert as if the empire vanished in a day. It did not. Fortresses still stood. Some provinces still obeyed. Imperial authority lingered in places for years. But after that battle it was weaker, and everyone knew it, even if they pretended otherwise. What changed was not only the loss of men, it was the feeling that the empire could no longer easily hold its own eastern lands together. Internal struggles deepened. Rivals in the court and army pressed their claims. The frontier became more vulnerable. Turkish groups settled and expanded farther into Anatolia over the decades that followed. Not because one battle magically handed them the whole peninsula, but because the empire had been badly shaken at the exact moment it needed unity. Manzikert opened the door wider than it had been before. Others stepped through. I think of the soldiers who never made it home. I think of the villages that would later hear new tongues in their markets, see new riders on their roads, and live under new rulers who came because the old empire had lost the strength to keep every road and valley. I think of Romanos himself, captured, released, and then pushed aside by the same world he had tried to save. There is a bitter kind of mercy in being spared on the battlefield only to be undone by your own people afterward. When I remember Manzikert, I do not see a single heroic moment. I see dust, broken lines, and men trying to make sense of commands that no longer reach them. I see the instant when confidence gave way to confusion, and confusion became ruin. We did not know it then, but the plain near Manzikert was where Byzantium's hold on Anatolia began to loosen for good. I survived long enough to understand that some defeats do not end in a day. They echo for generations, and their sound never really leaves the land.